welcome back to Good Morning Sri Lanka, and we've been talking about World Population Day, and of course with a focus on the youth. Now we've been talking a lot about well, a lot of things, but what we want to talk about now is the perception of the youth here in Sri Lanka. What is the perception of the youth?
I would like to draw the attention to an important fact, and it's not unrelated to what I said earlier on in terms of what are now the real challenges or the underlying determinants that make a success. And that is that you have a relatively low enrollment of young girls at a very high the tertiary education level, talking about college, university, and all of that. Now, at the same time, you have a low participation of women in the total Sri Lankan workforce. You have, I think, a level of mastering English or any foreign language which is not very high. What I'm trying to get at is that if you then look at the large number of Sri Lankan young women that migrate abroad to look for employment abroad, that should really draw the attention of the policymaker, that much more needs to be done, I think, to invest in good education of women, of young girls, of young women, but at the same time make sure that they are employable. And that's my link to the perception. There is often a perception, at least to the modest or humble outsider that I am, that the lady or the young girl may not be given the true chance to fulfill her potential. My office, for example, illustrates the opposite of that, because our ratio in terms of women versus men is very high. Yes, and happily so, very happily so. But I think the fact that earlier on I said there are 600,000 more Sri Lankan women than there are Sri Lankan men. I think those are issues that need to be looked into. I think there is also a perception, and I deliberately say perception, because we don't have representative data. There is anecdotes, there's stories and here and there. But there seems to be quite a high prevalence of violence and discrimination against women, and especially against young women, whether it's at the workplace, whether it's in public spaces, public places or spaces like public transport and so forth. And I think that's quite serious, and those perceptions have to change among young people, that you treat your partner with respect, you treat him or her, and especially her, on an equal footing, and that hence you create that, you unleash the potential that I seriously believe, every Sri Lankan young woman or girl has in herself, and that's what I mean by looking at the perceptions.
Mm-hmm. How does a country create enough awareness amongst its youth to create that kind of gender equality? How does that happen?
I think one of the successes has been that young people talk to young people. Peer education, whereby in all the languages of the country you get young people talk to their peers among themselves about the issues that directly concern them. I think that's a very, very successful way of addressing the issues among themselves. Not having adults dictate, not having the family dictate, but respecting, of course, the family, respecting the tradition and the culture, but have young people among themselves figure it out.
Because it doesn't sound condescending or like someone's just giving free advice. It's more of a dialogue and comes from a different place.
And I think these fora are important. They are, at least as far as we are concerned in the United Nations, we pay very strict attention to this. Let me just tell you one thing, that the entire United Nations system here in Sri Lanka the entire family of workers that at my level, at any level, who work for the United Nations in Sri Lanka, have the benefit of a youth advisory panel. 15 young Sri Lankans, experts in their own domain, whether it's social media, private sector, education, name it. They are advising us on how we should develop our programs to make them more youth-friendly, youth-sensitive, gender-sensitive. I think that's quite successful, and it's that kind of engaging and getting out of the way of young people. Getting out of the way, let them figure it out themselves. I think that's the kind of perception also, that sometimes there are these barriers, but on the other hand, Rai, I want to also say that being a young entrepreneur doesn't just come by posting selfies on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. I think it also has to show, like these youngsters here, that you have to be passionate, you have to be convinced about what you do, and you have to be competent in what you do. And I think the combination of that passion and motivation and competence should enable every young person to fulfill their potential. That's what we are trying to do at the United Nations Population Fund, and together with all our sister agencies, is that to make sure that a young person today in Sri Lanka can fulfill his or her potential.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, for them to fulfill his or her potential, there's a lot of work to be done, and you've got this theme set out for this year, but there's a massive action plan behind it.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of work that goes into it from this point onwards.
Yes, well, that's the point. That's the work that has gone into it from the Sri Lankan point of view, and with a system whereby you have, I think it was on that mythical day, which is the 14th of February, the president of the country launching the first ever national youth policy. Now there you have the policy framework with the political will behind to address all the issues of young people. That's the action plan. That's the roadmap. Now they are right now in consultations that are spearheaded by the Ministry of Youth and Skills Development, where you sit with young people and then you see what needs to happen in health, what needs to happen in domestic violence, what needs to happen in education for young people, with young people, what are the budgetary implications and so forth. These are processes, I think. Those are the actions that should happen right now. But when it comes to drawing the lessons globally, there's one thing that we have not touched upon, because when you say young people and investing in young people, you have to also invest in a population that gets older, into the aging population. And Sri Lanka is at a very interesting point in its demography, whereby those investments have to happen simultaneously and in a parallel way. I'm talking about pension schemes, I'm talking about looking after non-communicable diseases that are typically diseases of older age, of like diabetes, like certain forms of cancer and so forth. So it's very important that as you invest in young people, you look after the increasingly older population as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you see, or do you foresee, being the realist that you are in the kind of work that you do, any big barriers that can actually stop the kind of progress that we are making as a youth here in Sri Lanka?
No, I don't. I would say that natural hazards could play at some point, but there seems to be a good preparedness to address those. I actually don't. I see the wave of success and confidence that the country is riding on as quite unstoppable. I honestly don't know what could be in the way. What could?
That's a good thing. Nothing should stop us. But 20 years from now, where do you foresee us being, the youth of Sri Lanka?
The youth of Sri Lanka, I would say that as also from a coaching perspective and a leadership perspective, as it already happens now, you have a tremendous amount of influential young Sri Lankans that are engaged in world communities, in global discourse, in global policy making, through all kind of media. I think that that proportion in the world will be extremely high. You'll have a lot of younger Sri Lankans that will be at key decision-making positions in Sri Lanka as well as outside Sri Lanka. And that will not be limited to this sub-region, but I'm talking about the level of global players, United Nations and so forth. After all, the world has, the Secretary General of the United Nations has a special youth envoy for the first time ever. The person is 23 years old, he, happens to come from a country that is far less developed than Sri Lanka. So I think those kind of leadership positions are very important. And I see Sri Lankan young people being more and more present, more and more vocal, more and more confident as well, because it's often an issue of perception that there's this little lack of confidence still that is there. It may have to do with the language barrier. You asked about the barrier. I think, you see, I cannot foresee, but from the small amount of time that I've spent here, language is definitely one. Ways and means of expressing themselves is one. And I would almost want to say, and I hope I'm wrong, but treating women with respect on an equal footing, treating young girls with respect as they grow and as the generations grow, I think will be very important. It could be a barrier, but I'm pretty sure it won't be. Are
you seeing positive changes? We were talking about gender equality, but are you seeing changes in the right direction?
I do. I'm definitely not well placed to put any evaluation or judgment on this, but from my experience, I've come from quite a number of countries where I see that the status of women is fairly advanced, that you have extremely influential women at decision-making positions, but most and foremost that we have younger women as tremendously capable, talented entrepreneurs and just change agents, and I can say that with pride and confidence, that including in my own office I make a deliberate effort to recognize young women, young female talent, and I'm not the only one. I know that I'm not the only one in the United Nations. I'm not the only one in the private sector. And that is a wave that is coming, and I think that will be very, very important to continue that.
Mm-hmm. Right now we take a quick break. When we come back, we have more conversation on the World Population Day. Stay with us.